Shalom, everyone. Glad to see you again. This is from NETIV, and this is the second lesson in the series on Job. I called this particular chapter, chapter 2, I call it How Much Suffering is Too Much? Because that seems to be a question that would be on most people's minds when they realized all that Job is going to go through. And it's not going to be for a short period of time. By the time it is all over, he will have spent 9 months in this suffering. So how much is too much? Let's just get started and let's look at the first verse. Our story begins with, on a certain day came about that the angels of God came to stand beside the Lord, and the adversary, Hasatan, too came among them to stand beside the Lord. Now, the understanding is the day. If you're following the Jewish understanding, the day simply happens to be the day called Rosh Hashanah, which is the day of judgment. So this was the first time. Now, this same verse was recorded in the first chapter. Now, we're obviously later in time, so then this can't be the same day. It has to be much later. And so as we begin to understand, there's a period of time from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which is called the 10 days of repentance. And so this is the 10th day. This is Yom Kippur. He's now standing before him one more time. This is the day of the sealings of judgment. Now, this would also include forgiveness. So it's not simply a matter of just simply anger on the part of God towards man, but it's the idea of the sealing of judgments against a person. It's interesting to wonder if Job, since he was not a Jew, what significance would he have ever attached to the day called Yom Kippur? Probably none. So there is this universal set of dates that maybe we might find that in the world to come, they become also very important to us, or at least at the end of days. Now, once again, the angels come and they're standing there. And now notice verse 2. Now the Lord said to the adversary, "Where are you coming from?" Now the adversary replied to the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking in it." It sounds familiar. Shouldn't I expect to hear something more than simply the fact that he is wandering? Wasn't that what he was doing the first time we talked about this? Now remember, when we talked about it in the first chapter, Satan probably, when he was walking around, was making comparisons, just like we all do. And when we compare things, the one thing that we might want to compare is people. If we were comparing people in the day in which Job lived or possibly lived, now again, some say that this is just a story. It has no truth. Others will tell you that this is a true story that Moses will record, a midrashic story. Now, in the story itself, as we go through it, we're beginning to understand that as he's walking around, and if he's doing nothing else but comparing, his comparison would be to probably Abraham. Because remember, in our first lesson, we began to go through the time period, the number of people, all of the things that are going on in it. Now, there is no report of what Satan did on, or the effects that he might have had on our hero prior to this, but we just know that this is going on. So Rambam reminds us that just because he is standing among the other angels does not make him equal to them. In fact, there's no understanding of Satan as the Jewish people understand him to the qualities that are given to him by the Christian church. Christians identify him as almost being equal to God. They give him credit for being able to do whatever. But that's not what we're talking about here. There's a little bit more limitations. The story goes on and says, "And the Lord said to the adversary, 'Have you paid attention to my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, and sincere and upright man, God-fearing and shunning evil. And he still maintains his sincerity. Yet you enticed me against him to destroy him for no good reason. Well, here's Satan responding. Why are you asking me to do some of these things? Now, the query itself seems to be carrying a little more weight this time as we go through. And as we're going through this, we tend to get to understand that he tried to entice Job to act foolishly. That's what we understand is going on. What is it this time, or what's the point at this time? It is about a system of laws and justice, because remember, the Torah hasn't been given. So the justice and the laws that are identified for us are the 7 laws of Noah. Those are the laws that he's comparing people to, the same ones that Noah was compared to that caused him to be called a righteous one. So we're looking at those things over and over again. Now, regardless of what Satan will try to do to break Job, remember that he cannot break him spiritually. Physically, he will break him down, and emotionally, he will break him down. Spiritually will become much more clear as we go later into the story. Verse 4 says, "Now the adversary replied to the Lord and said, 'Skin for skin, and whatever a person has, he will give for his life.'" It's not an easy statement for us to comprehend, or really, well, I guess it could be. The understanding is the fact that obviously we never put him in peril, but we've never put him under the gun, so to speak. But would we be willing to sacrifice our children in order to save our own lives? Because you see, that's what's going to happen. Job will first off lose his children. Look at 5 and 6. "But stretch forth your hand now and touch his bones and his flesh, and he will not blaspheme you to your face." And the Lord said to the adversary, "Here he is in your hands, but preserve his life." Satan's at the point of understanding that no matter what he does, it is really God's hand who's actually upon him. All he is doing is acting and creating what we think would be his response. So we need to understand that there is also another object here. He's not allowed to touch his being. Job cannot die, nor can his wife. Now, the Jewish understanding here is very simple. The fact that the husband and wife are one. And so therefore, to take the wife away would be to kill half of him, so to speak. And so therefore, he's not allowed to touch his wife, but he can continue to touch the kids, which he did, the land, his possessions, all of those were gone. That's what was going on. Now Satan he departs again, and he brings about upon Job what we would call sores and blisters. Now, according to the Jewish Midrash, what happened is that the bottom half from his waist down, he was infected with boils or something boil-like. And the top half of him was actually the idea of blisters. And as we look at these blisters, we see him scratching with this pot, trying to remove the pain that's being caused or inflicted because of them. But we also have to understand that the bottom half is just as important, because the bottom half, if it is boils and they are beginning to break and fester, what you have is a man who is probably beyond, well, his smell would probably be very, very difficult to deal with. So here we go. Now, in Genesis chapter 33, verses 15 to 22, we're going to discuss further about Eliyahu, which is going to be one of those who discusses the healing properties of suffering. But up until now, that's really not going to become much of a subject. Verse 8 goes on to say, "Then he took himself a potsherd to scratch himself with, and he sat down in the midst of the ashes." Many believe that the ashes that he's sitting in are actually the skin peeling off and providing him with a cushion. He needed the cushion because of the blisters, and the potsherd in order to scratch and deal with that which is festering. Malbim quotes the Midrash when he says that Jacob was suffering from two kinds of afflictions, and he goes through listing the scratching and the boils. We now can have a cameo appearance of Jacob's wife. She's only here for this verse, and then she's gone again. And it begins by saying, then his wife said to him, do you still maintain your sincerity? Blaspheme God and die. Now, does his wife have a tenor of Hava when we look at this story of the Garden of Eden when she offers Adam the poisoned fruit? You got to eat it too. Do you know who Job's wife is biblically? Well, according to the book of the Biblical Antiquities, which is one of those books that the Jews read, and also found in a Muslim treatise called El Tabori, they both identify her as Jacob's daughter, Dinah. Some believe that it is used to be, it's a way of tying together Jacob and Job, because the characters themselves are going to be important, because they're going to both come out of, if this is correct, out of the lineage of Abraham. Now, in the liturgy of the Moroccan Jews, this whole story, the book of Job, is read, and it's the only place that it's read, dealing with this particular concept. And it's always read on the same day during the year. And it's read during the time when they would go through Va'alishka. But anyway, verse 10 goes on to say, and he said to her, you talk as one of a graceful women talk. Disgraceful. Try it again. You talk as one of the disgraceful women talk. Shall we also accept the good from God and not accept the evil? Despite all this, Jacob did not sin with his lips. In other words, he did not blaspheme. And again, this whole story is based on the idea of will he or won't he? And I hate to think of it in terms of a bet. Now, according to Rashi, Job did not sin with his lips, but according to Bava Batra 16a, he did with his heart. Difference? It was not manifest outwardly. Now, we're introduced to his three friends here. And I feel certain that he had more than three friends when this whole thing started, or before this whole thing started. But I assume they chose because of distances maybe, and because of the problems that he faced, not to come. But as verse 11 says, now three friends heard about all this evil that befell him. And they came each one from his place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. And they met together to come to bemoan him and to console him. Now, it's important that we understand they're coming to console him. What does that mean, and how will that look as we go through our story? Now, it's okay that you did not, well, it's okay. How did you know that Job was sick? Or I guess the question to the three, how did you know he was sick? And these three come from various places. They don't appear to come from the same area. And because they're coming from three different places, but yet they arrive at approximately the same time, we find something rather interesting going on. Now, the relationship between these four appears to be, well, it used to be ideal. The Rav would talk about it, Rabbi Schneerson talked to his students about a proverb indicating that it is better for one to die than to live without friends like these. Now, their efforts to comfort Job are going to fail miserably. And in some inexplicable way, the friends exercise a harmful effect on Job. As the conversations progress, the discussions turns from thoughts of debate to simple arguments that are going to be carried out. Job will move from silence, he'll become confrontational. So the problem then becomes, here are his three friends. Why? What went wrong? If they came for the right reasons, what's the problem? What's going on? Now we might find some understanding then about our characters if we go to chapter 33 in the book of Genesis. Because you see, to listen to Eliyahu as he directs his remarks to Job, it's about a wider audience that must have been standing or listening. The story obviously was heard by others over a larger distance. Genesis chapter 33 deals with the areas where these three men came from. All of them came from southern portions of Israel and Edom. That's basically where they're coming from. Now, each of these characters will spend some time actually attacking Job. Simple offers of suggestions for his suffering. Why are you suffering? They'll give him some possibilities. And as a result, Job does not feel the need to respond. But only later, when we find Elihu, are we going to find some different understandings. Now, as we go through our story then, one more thing. Let's look at the last verses. Let's look at verse 12. This is a short chapter, I understand, so it's not going to take you long to go through it and think about it. But at the end, I want you to please understand that there was no conversation that was held with these men until Job spoke. And Job did not speak for 1 week. Imagine his friends. Obviously, they are friends. How could you sit in the presence of one who is suffering like he was and just sit there in silence? I assume prayers were given. I assume there were thoughts that were going on in their heads. And I assume the physical suffering that he was going through with the smell, with his physical disfigurement from all that was happening to him, must have made it very difficult to just simply sit there for 7 days, the period of time that one would go through mourning. Anyway, as we look at it, he begins by saying in this next verse, in verse number 12, now they lifted their eyes and looked from afar, but they did not recognize him. So this is something where they're going back and looking and reaching this point. And so they raised their voices and they wept, and each one rent his robe, and they threw earth on their heads towards heaven. They could not recognize him. Understand how much he has changed since the last time they saw him. And the house that he must have been sitting in was much less than the house that he originally had. We're not sure. We're not even sure he was sitting in a house. We just simply have him. Now, they could not recognize him, so we can only imagine the suffering. Finally, it goes on to say, now they sat down with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights. But no one said a word to him because they perceived that the pain was very severe. 7 days. Sheva, the period of time of mourning. He had just finished mourning in their estimation over the loss of his children, I would imagine. But the grief must have been very intense. So after 7 days, Job himself will talk. But what prompts him to talk? Did they not have any words of comfort for him? Or were they following the Jewish understanding of conversation must start with the one who is suffering? I want you to think about what's going on, because in the next chapter, we're going to deal with Eliphaz and we're going to deal with Job. Each one is going to have something particular to say. So I want you to just look at those first 2 chapters again and give yourself some background and get prepared for what's about to come next. With that, I want to say shalom, Lila Tov. Hope to see you for chapter 3.